Produced by Ranting Rhino Productions, Praxis Pedagogy exists to position our teaching and learning practice within different methodologies. We want to construct a guild of educators dedicated to designing a difference in our own teaching and learning and in our students' experience. Hey everybody, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to episode 74 of Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. In this amazing episode, I get to sit down and talk with Sherri Spelic. She's from Vienna, Austria, and Sherri is an educator, a leadership coach, and digital interloper at home in Vienna, Austria. She is the founder and publishing editor of Identity, Education, and Power. She's taught elementary physical education at the American International School, Vienna, since 1996. She has an MA in sports psychology, which we talk about, and an MEd in independent school leadership. She blogs frequently on a variety of topics and is founder of the online publication Identity, Education, and Power, which invites educator commentary on the intersections of those three themes. Her essay collection, Care at the Core, was released in 2019. You need to buy that book. Go to Kindle, go to Amazon. I've got a link in the show notes on the website, praxispedagogy.com. You need this book. It's an amazing book. Anyway, sit back, relax, enjoy your coffee, enjoy your cup of tea, wherever you are. Hopefully you're in a library somewhere or maybe at your favorite coffee shop, because we're allowed to do those things now. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Thank you for tuning in. Three, two, one. Hey everybody, welcome back to Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. So glad you took the time to tune in and listen to us today. Today I have a very special guest, Sherri Spelic. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Spelic.
Spelic. You know, here it is. I should have asked before I pressed record. Thank you for correcting me on that. That is. I am so sorry that I pronounced your last name incorrectly.
No worries at all.
Okay, thank you. Sherri. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started in some of the questions that I want to ask you, because I got some things I want to learn.
Okay. So my name is Sherri Spelic, and that is a name that I have been sporting for only about 16 years. And so it's also taken me quite some time to sort of get used to it. So, so that's my name. I teach in an international school in Vienna, Austria, where I have been on staff for, I believe, 25 years, which is a remarkably long time to be in any one place. I teach elementary physical education. And I also, for most of the years that I've been at the school, have also coached track and field, which is another great love of mine.
That's amazing. So for those who are listening who may not know, what's an international school? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a school. So I live in Austria, and the school itself is one in which we're working with an American curriculum and also the International Baccalaureate Diploma program. And we offer this English-speaking curriculum to students from who are local, so Austrian students, but also students whose families are from all over the world, who are in Austria or in Vienna. Yeah,
that's cool. And so, are these families somewhat transient in the sense that they come to Austria for a short period of time and then off they go in a couple, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Many of them. So we have embassy families, we have corporate families, and then of course there's a United Nations center in Vienna, which also draws a lot of international families who are connected to government agencies. So yes, we do have a lot of folks who are in for 2, 3, 5 years and then move on. But we also have, actually, would say a remarkable number of families who are in Vienna for the duration, for longer periods of time. And that is also a really wonderful thing to see.
That's amazing. So the school system in Austria, is it publicly funded or is it a split between public and private?
Well, the school where I'm teaching right now is a private school. So that is, it's run on tuition fees. However, I mean, my own sons attended Austrian public schools when they were younger. And so their elementary education was definitely in Austrian public schools. So I have some familiarity with that as well. And I feel like that also I wanted that always to be an option for my own children, that, if I weren't at my school, that they could also attend the Austrian public schools.
Nice. So what drew you into education? And then, so as you begin that answer, we're going to be heading towards what drew you to Austria.
What drew me to education, I would say, is probably my upbringing. So my mother was an educator, but not a classroom teacher. She actually, I think, had several different roles in Cleveland public high schools, where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I was used to sort of just being around this woman who was, I would say, almost fanatical about books and reading, and seeing that children had books. So that was one aspect. And she also she came from a family of educators. So I feel like it was just kind of there in our families, just embedded. But also, I think I didn't think about teaching until I spent time in Austria. I came to Austria the first time as a college student. I did my junior year abroad here, and that was maybe the first time that people asked me for instruction in English, where I was, sort of tutoring here or there, and I kind of thought, there's maybe something to this. So that was the in. Was sort of just beginning to teach English as a complete novice. Like, well, let's start here.
Right. So then what drew you to specifically elementary school? Because, I mean, I knew what it was like being in elementary school, even though I'm a little older now. But I mean, I can still remember some of my years in elementary school going, oh, mercy. Like, you have that one class that you always remember from elementary school that you're like, okay, that was a fun class, but man, if I had to be the teacher for that class, I would be pulling the rest of my hair out.
Exactly. Elementary is when I started teaching. Elementary was the very furthest thing from my mind. In fact, I really thought. I remember thinking I was 23 when I started teaching, and I was teaching middle and high school. And I said, I could never do elementary. And it was several years later when I was asked to step into a role at my school where they needed a long-term substitute. And I said yes, not realizing what I was actually getting into. And so in some ways, I like to say that the job happened to me. But once I got acquainted with elementary students and how they operate, I thought, oh, maybe this is something for me. And then I also had an amazing mentor that I worked with for the first 15 years, who was just so enthusiastic about physical education, and who was able to provide me with really the foundational knowledge of, look, these are the things we need to do, but here's how to have fun. So I would say that her mentoring was absolutely key for me to sort of unlock the what's special about physical education at the elementary level.
Right. Yeah, that's so key, isn't it? Mentorship is so key. When you did your Master of Arts in Sports Psychology, were you looking at achieving that master's degree with an eye on education, or were you looking for something else?
It's funny that you should ask. Of course, I was looking for something else, and then I decided, I see how this works. It's a degree that at the time I was a competitive athlete. I was a competitive runner, and I was very interested in the psychological aspects of how we actually, what happens when we compete. And I was really interested also in the coaching interface, how it is that when we coach athletes, how do we help them sort of master their own emotional and mental states to produce the best performance. So that was my area. And I really thought that would lead me into what I was looking at was athletic, what did I call it? It was athletic counseling. So I was really interested in how to help athletes not just perform better, but also to help them enjoy their lives and to sort of see the broad spectrum of possibilities, within athletics, but also beyond that. And that was at the time when I was asked to step into this role as the long-term sub. So my study then became a little bit more about the process of teaching, but also was still concerned with motivation but mostly motivating children and how we bring folks into something that may feel unfamiliar or something that they really love but are having difficulty in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And I ask, are your sons athletes?
Yes and no. So my first son did pursue, I think he did judo for some time. He tried out a couple of other things, but competition was not the thing that he wanted to do. My second child, many years later, so they're 13 years apart. My second child, in many ways, was all about competition and still is. So he is definitely he's a competitor, and so he did ski jumping here in Austria for almost 4 years, between the ages of 8 and 12. And so that was a great experience for him and also for us as parents, just to learn this other world that happens. But it's a sport that is so specialized that at a certain age, at 14, you kind of need to either go pro or go home. And it reached a stage where he sort of said, I think I'll go home. So we stopped that. And so he is an athlete. It's just but no particular specialization as of yet.
Okay. The reason I ask is my son, I have 4 kids, and they're almost all, 4. They're almost all adults. I have a son and 3 daughters in that order. My son was a competitive soccer player. In fact, he was a goalkeeper, and he played at a pretty high level, went to Europe to do some tournaments and stuff and did well, and decided to come home. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to stay in Europe and be away from family. And I've always been trying to figure out ways to get into his head. Mm-hmm. To try and understand, because I played competitive soccer too when I was younger. In fact, I was a goalkeeper, and so as a parent, I always had this one lens, and then as an ex-player, I had another lens, mm-hmm. and trying to understand who he was when he was playing and all of that stuff. But ironically, maybe not so ironically, he went to school at a community college here, and he got a bachelor's degree in physical education and coaching. Because he still wants to be a coach. In fact, he's doing private training for kids in our community and doing stuff on a volunteer basis. And so The reason I ask about your ME in sports psychology is because that's something that he's always been interested in. And in fact, he connects best with younger kids, like elementary school kids. And I'm wondering if there's a real strong connection there, in the sense that the kids seem to be more, I don't know, if flexible or pliable with their thinking and their understanding, if that even makes sense in a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I think there are a lot of things, particularly because your son has had that experience to compete at a very high level. So he knows the pressures, right? The expectations, sort of all those things that make it tough, that are the reasons that many people don't continue or persist. And so when you work with young children, one of the beauties of that is that if you can connect with them, I mean, it's still all relationship based, right? If they see in you an interest in them, and they see that you like them, then they are ready to give everything, to sort of be in your orbit, and it's just such a wonderful, powerful relationship. I mean, I have to say, coaching is something that I love. And I think in many ways that infuses my whole teaching philosophy, because if coaching is sort of the ideal pedagogical place to be, then why not make that sort of the centerpiece of the classroom, where students also want to be there, right? Because that's really the key difference, right? In class, students are required to be there. They're required to be in front of you, and yeah, you were there. Coaching, it's by choice. So students are showing up because, or athletes or kids are showing up because they want to be there. It's something they want to learn how to do. They want to learn to get better. And so for me, I guess the question was always, how do I make this a situation where kids they want to be there. They want to be in the classroom with me, and we can do stuff, and they can get better, and that they're motivated to get better. And so I can definitely appreciate how your son is probably able to work with that in students, to create an atmosphere that allows kids to feel like, ooh, I want to come back. I want to get together with that guy and learn more stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you learned any strategies as you look at that age group and say, the difference of being on the field, like you said, on the field, and in the classroom is on the field, that most of them want to be there. There are a few that, they're there because mom and dad want them to stay out of trouble. Fair enough. But it's so true, right? That,
yes, absolutely.
Most of them want to be there because they want to be good at what they're doing, or they want to get better. And so there's some goals there, but in the classroom, I mean, they're mandated to be there. Were there some strategies that you employed that worked, or maybe didn't work, as you worked out this application?
Sure. I think for me, it's been a long process. But I really think it begins with listening to kids, understanding what it is, what their priorities are. Because as teachers, right, we have our agenda. We know, okay, I'm here and I'm going to teach you this. And, it's taken many years to sort of realize that teaching is maybe a misnomer. I can share some skills that I'd like us to try to practice, but ultimately, my job is to create the conditions for their exploration and their learning. I can't mandate learning. I can't say, now you learn this. Instead, I can say, hey, listen, we're going to practice this. We're practicing overhand throwing. Here's how we're going to practice it. And then we do that, but then we play a game where we're using that skill. And so I've found that elementary kids in PE, and this is probably true also, I want to say K-12, they want to have fun. If you ask them, well, what do you want? Well, we want to have fun. And if that's their priority, my job is to structure our time together so that to them, it seems fun. And that doesn't mean that everything is a game, but actually for elementary kids, they can pretty much make anything into a game.
That's so
It
true.
doesn't.
Yeah.
It really doesn't take too much.
Yeah.
And it is a game. And there are some kids who love to compete and they want to, is it a race? Is it? And I'll say, no, there's no stopwatch on this. But that's just it. So for me, it's always about responding to what it is. Kids are already telling me, I want this. And I'll say, well, okay, well, how do we? And then I actually use them as resources. And say, well, okay, how are we going to make that happen?
Huh. So do you see that being watered down and for a lack of a better term, I'll just say, that creativity, that aspect of wanting to have fun and learning, do you see that kind of being, well, I don't know, pushed out the door as they grow older in the K-12 system and even as they get into college, university even?
Oh, sure. But it's also, right, PE, depending on who you are and where you sit in an organization, how you look at PE will vary. But for kids, again, their priorities are actually primarily social. And I would say that's true also in other classrooms, that their concerns are still social. Who am I going to sit next to? Who is going to be in my group? Am I having to do this group project with this person or with these people? And so all of those calculations shape their experience and their approach to how they think about accomplishment and achievement. And so I do think in terms of how I guess for me, in schools, we need to think about how are we responding to students' demands as systems, right? I mean, how are we as a system responding to what students are telling us? I need this. And really, our students are telling us, I need interaction. I need validation. I need encouragement. I need, a whole bunch of things that are largely social, emotional in nature. But those are the things that's the groundwork for learning anything, whether it's learning an instrument or learning math facts, if it's learning how to understand a literary text. That emotional foundation is necessary for students to feel like, yeah, this is worth my while. And I would say as kids get older, that notion of what is worth their while it's just a bigger factor.
That's so cool. You're also a leadership coach, and I'm wondering if some of the stuff that we're talking about with sports psychology and kids in elementary school, I'm wondering if there's some transferability here to your leadership coaching practice and interaction.
I hope so. I hope so. One of the things about leadership that I've discovered, because I'm not someone I haven't held, a titled position of leadership per se. But I do know what I look for in leaders and what I hope. I mean, I have ideas about what good leadership looks like, and I know when I've experienced it and what those qualities have been. And again, I think it's, for me, the leadership piece that I'm most concerned about is how well leaders are able to listen and how well leaders are able to read the room and respond to the room. And again, I guess that's in the same range of, right, this social, emotional foundation of human interaction that forms the basis for everything else, for how our perception works, think about how we perceive a problem. I think of every faculty meeting when we have a problem, how that problem is perceived and how we go about trying to solve it. The leadership piece in that, for me, a lot of it has to do with how well that person or those people are able to listen to the people in the room, to to honestly listen to their concerns, to provide space for people to perhaps problem solve in smaller groups or in specialized groups if that's necessary, and to allow people the possibility to wrestle with the problem, not to take away their agency in trying to solve their own problem. Yeah, so it's all related.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Okay, and as you're describing that, I'm thinking about, your blog that you frequently write about identity, education, and power, and I can really see a connection between what you're doing in your blog life or your blog sphere, and how that can even, well, let me just say it this way, that the interaction that you have with your elementary school students in some way is starting to pave the road for their leadership interactions, not only as they grow into their teenage years, but even into their adult years. Would you agree with that, or?
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I feel seen. Thank you. Honestly, yes. In so many ways, I see teaching, and maybe this has to do with age too, but what I find is that students really of any age, but students really, they want to have agency, they want to have choice. They want to show what they can do. And sometimes I think my job as an educator is actually to get out of their way more than it is to shape the way. That sometimes my job is really just to set up the parameters in which they can show what they can do and where they can shine for each other, right? Because it's not even always about shining for me, but they want being able to show their strengths to each other, and for them to recognize, oh, wow, look at that. Look at what she can do. And in that way, that they then become much more capable of, first of all, acknowledging strengths in others, recognizing their own strengths, but then also recognizing how you can bring those things together to create something new that's not necessarily dictated by me, that it's something they create on their own. And that for me is kind of, that's what I'm going for. That's the big goal. And how that plays out, I think there are lots of ways that I'll never know how it plays out. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, until somebody stands up with a valedictorian address and mentions you in their grade 4 physical ed class or something along those lines. And I remember this one person and she made such an impact on me. Yeah. Isn't that the case? So getting back to your blog with identity, education, power, how do you weave in or begin to weave in, educate younger children about this issue of identity and power? Because I mean, we live in a world right now that's dealing a lot with those two topics alone. How do you work through that?
Well, I guess in many ways, the Identity, Education, and Power is actually is a publication where I originally conceived it as a space where I could invite other writers to contribute. And that's maybe the piece that I'm most proud of, is that the folks who have contributed to make that publication as rich as it is, because there are so many different voices that have made that space an absolutely fascinating one, and always timely in a lot of respects. With my students, identity and power. I mean, if you spend any time with children know all about power. I mean, think of how you've experienced your own children, right? As a parent, I mean, they experience power in a very visceral way, and they also understand very early how to execute power, how to exercise their own power and experiment with their own power. And so when in my classroom, the identity piece is also always there, because in PE, in a lot of ways, kids are, I feel like kids may be a bit freer than they are in other spaces. It's the space, it's the activities, and it's the things that we're doing that allow them to interact differently. And so that the way that they experience identity and power is going to come up in the simple interaction of, my friends, please find a partner. Or it's in, friends, can you please make all gender groups of 3? And then there's the question, what is she? Oh, she means boys and girls. Okay. And in those interactions, there's usually someone who's very hesitant. There's someone who is 2 or 3 people who are going to grab their best friends, and those are the only people they want to work with. You could watch my students do that, and you would immediately recognize, okay, this is the popular strong kid. This is the person who's more reserved. This is someone who's not very interested in following the directions. All of those roles would be immediately visible to you. And so in principle, I think our students' days are a constant negotiation of power and identity. Who am I in this context? What is my influence? What is the level of my influence? How powerful do I feel to make the choices that I'd like to make? So all of those things are there. So when we're talking about making groups and so on, I may not be using the term power, but it's always present.
So interesting, because it immediately makes me think of that, kids are awesome to watch and hang out with because they're just so unfiltered, right? they haven't
Yes.
learned the social filters, the social norms. They haven't learned the nuances. And I think for the most part, quite honestly, they don't care.
Well, they do. They do. They care a lot. They do. They really, they care a lot. But at the same time, and so, the conversations that I can have with, let's say, 9-10-year-olds about the choices they're making in terms of their groups, that if you give them time, they'll come clean. And they'll be able to name. They'll say, well, they all want to be with their friends. I'll say, well, does that give us fair teams? No. Well, what kind of game do you all want to have? Fair. But in order to have the fair teams, they realize, they're going to have to make a sacrifice. And that's a conversation that it's powerful because it's so palpable. It's concrete. They know exactly these are the terms of engagement. Yes, I can be with my best friends and they can be with their best friends, but when we have a game, they are going to romp our team, and that's not going to be very fun. And so if I want to play the game in a way that we can all sort of enjoy it, then I'm going to have to, and that's exactly. So that's the conversation about, is it worth it? What's it worth to me? So which fairness do I want right now?
Yeah. As you're describing that, I see so many parallels to the education system that I'm engaged in and move and have my being with in regards to leading and being in leadership and teamwork and the whole thing. It's just more sophisticated in the sense that we hide it better. Mm-hmm. Our excuses sound better. and I'll even just reveal a little bit about myself. Like myself, I'm thinking of that going, yeah, there are people that I would rather work with for sure. But is that the best? Right. And so incorporating a person that I may not get along with entirely on a team may be better for the team than for me. And what you're talking about, the sacrifice piece, makes a ton of sense.
Yes, but sense making is not always our goal. Because actually, we as humans, we also want to have fun. we we want to like the conditions under which we're working. So yeah, it does involve some tough choices. And so hence that really that I love the word negotiating, like having to really negotiate often so much with ourselves first, right? In order to sort of say, okay, I'm gonna bite the bullet. I'm gonna separate from my bestie, and I'm gonna go to this group, and then we're gonna play on this. Okay, it's gonna be all right.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. I just love it. So switching gears a little bit, what led you to write as much as you want to write?
That, goodness, I think I've always written. I've always, or it seems to me that in one form or another, whether it's been in correspondence. So back in the 80s, when I was in college, I remember I had a long distance boyfriend, and we had this. I can now say an absolutely amazing correspondence, and also with my best friend, with whom I have not lived in the same city with my best friend since college. So senior year, we went our separate ways, and so we have not lived actually in the same continent in 30 years, but we've always corresponded. So through email and letters, and so I've always written. I would say that in when did I decide? I think I started my blog in 2012. And, again, just sort of like, just for my own edification, edified listener, okay, I'll just write some stuff. And the turning point, I would say, was Twitter. I fell into Twitter. Someone invited me into Twitter, and I thought, okay, well, what's this about? And I realized this is people who were pretty much talking about stuff they read. And I can do that. And they're interested in, and we can have this conversation about stuff that we read and stuff. And I didn't realize that was the text-based sort of like hub that I had been craving. And so that was that connection to reading and writing. And so one of the best descriptions that I found for my writing is writing back. That a good deal of my blogging is in response to something that I read or heard. And usually it's something that I found on Twitter or came across through various channels. So that's it.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. So what are you reading right now? Are you one of these people that loves to read like 3 or 4 books at a time? Or are you like, I dive into this one and just devour it and then I move on?
I do a bit of both. Currently, I am reading a couple of books at a time. I have in nonfiction for actually a book group. We're reading Blind Spot, which is about bias training. And I have to say, I get it, and it's very, I get it, but it's not very fulfilling as a read. But it's an interesting one, and I'm very curious what our conversations around that book will be. Another book that I just finished, and it was to die for, is Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. I think so. I don't have the name, but absolutely phenomenal fiction, just because it's so straightforward. It's just stellar. So I actually went into our library today looking for her other book, which checked out, but I will be on that in no time.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. So I'll make sure to link those in the show notes so people can.
Intimacies. It's fabulous.
And you said it's fiction?
It is fiction.
Okay.
It's wonderful. And I guess one of the things that I loved about it is that it's about an interpreter. So someone who's interpreting from French to English. And because it deals with language and translation, and that's a world that I live in, since I live this bilingual existence in German and English. So it really, I really loved it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you find yourself gravitating more towards nonfiction or fiction?
For many, many years, it was all nonfiction and almost never fiction. And in the last 4 to 5 years, since I have befriended so many lovely English teachers on Twitter, I have found my way back to excellent fiction.
Nice. Well, I'm sure all those who are listening will be very happy to hear that. Oh, that's good. I've drifted quite a ways away from fiction. Just because I feel like there's just so much to read, and I don't have all the time in the world. And so when you read, and I'm curious about this, when you read nonfiction, do you do anything special about that reading? Like, do you take notes? Do you write? Do you underline? Do you go back? Like, do you dog ear? Like, I want to know all that stuff.
I do. That's such a great question. And it's so funny because recently I was walking with my librarian friend and I mentioned underlining in my book, and she looked at me dumbfounded. And I said, well, they're my own books. I mean, I would never do that with a library book, but she said, I'm thinking of you very differently right now.
Oh, really?
and so I said, well, I do underline in books that I own. So yes, I do underline a lot of times. I will dog ear particular books, and it's very interesting. There are certain books where I feel hesitant to underline. So and this is it's very odd to me. I don't know why that is. And I think there's a certain, I don't know, there are some books that feel sacred to me. And I did a lot of dog earing in Tracy McMillan Cottom's Stick. Because I guess in some ways Tracy's writing is kind of sacred to me. I mean, Tracy is sort of like my great mentor, and I didn't underline in thick, which surprises me. I really think, but I did dog ear a lot. So
I know some people who will find a book and they get into it and they realize this is a gem and they don't want to underline, highlight, do notes, and so they'll buy a second one. And that new one that they bought, they'll put on the shelf and to do their going back and casual reading. But then the first one they bought, they'll mark it up and dog ear it and coffee stain, tear stain, the whole thing, right?
That may be my next level. I may end up doing that. Yeah, I could see it happening.
My wife gets mad when I start doing that because sometimes I'll buy a book on Kindle and go, okay, I need a hard copy because I'm the kind of person that I love.
Yes.
I fell in love with books a long time ago, and my mom read a lot. My dad read a lot, but he read newspapers. Mm-hmm. So he would get like 4 or 5 different newspapers and he would read every one of them, cover to cover. And then my mom read tons of fiction, and I come from a trades background. So, you know, reading for me in my working life was all about technical reading. So manuals, specs, you know, rules and regulations, those kinds of things. And then, but I've always been a reader outside of that in different disciplines too. But I fell in love with reading, and I love just the smell of books. Like there are some bookstores that I will just walk into and just breathe deep through the nose. Right. And it's like, yeah, I know there's dust. Yep. I know in a COVID world, there's, you know, I know all that, but just give me a moment. Because I just love the smell, right?
Oh my gosh, I'm right there with you. I love a good bookstore. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. I remember when I would travel with teams, and at an international school, when you travel, when you leave the country in a lot of cases. So I remember going to Zurich, and particularly in the early 2000s, when we would go to Zurich for basketball or track, whatever, there was a single bookstore that I always would seek out, and they had the best selection of English books. And it was, at the time, I was totally into nonfiction, so I was reading a lot of just different things. But I have to say, some of my best nonfiction picks are from Fussel Orel in Zurich. So that was just I love that bookstore.
That's so good. And of course, being in your part of Europe, I'm thinking like you go to a bookstore or a library, it's got to be like 200 years old. They got to have books in there that were written in like the late 1800s that are still there, right? Like I know that that's a big stereotype, but I'm just like, there's got to be
They
places like
exist.
that, right?
They exist. They exist. Absolutely.
Mercy. The big spiral staircase that goes up 3 floors, right? Wrought iron, the whole deal.
Those exist, although I haven't visited one recently.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, no kidding. Right.
Well,
Oh, mercy.
yes.
So again, switching gears a little bit. What's top of mind for you lately?
I have been thinking about positionality. And I want to say that's the most recent essay that I wrote was about positionality. And it's interesting because I think I wrote an essay earlier in the spring that had to do with status literacy. And I feel like it was a prelude. Like I wasn't quite ready I didn't realize that then I was talking about positionality. I was, of course, but I wasn't ready to use the term. And so now when I wrote this most recent essay, I thought, this is it, because I was able to put it in more concrete terms in ways that lots of people were able to say, aha. And I think part of that had to do with it wasn't a straight race gender thing. That instead I framed a couple of my examples in terms of, for instance, in my school, I'm a 25-year veteran and a local hire. And that when I'm listening to new hires talk about their experience coming to my school, their difficulties, their struggles, as international hires, that I need to sit down and listen. That I do not need to be telling them about their experience, that it's my turn to listen because I don't have that experience and I've been in my spot for 25 years. At the same time, I also need to be thinking, wait, I've been at this place for 25 years. What influence might I have in improving the conditions that they are describing? And so my point is about positionality. It depends on where we are. It's context dependent, and from a variety of different factors and layers of identities that influence how we are positioned. And this is so important to understand. Race and gender, yes. But for instance, in my organization, with my seniority, I have a different standing in the organization. That I might have power to speak about something or to speak to members of leadership in a way that someone who is new might not. And yeah, so that is top of mind for me right now.
So how do you see that dovetailing with influence, especially when it comes to mentorship and leadership, right? Because I've heard this phrase a long time about leading in a 360 degree pattern where you lead those who are, in a hierarchical situation, you lead those underneath you a certain way, and you lead your peers in a certain way, and then you lead those who are higher in the system a certain way. Does that come into play with what you're talking about in regards to positionality and influence?
Absolutely. But I guess for me, the issue is I want each person, wherever they are in their situation, I want people to become competent at recognizing their distinct positionality in that moment, and then to step into this other context and recognize how their positionality can shift and change. And so it is about becoming a better observer, right, of ourselves and of situations. And one of the things I think we put a lot of emphasis on leadership, but not enough on group membership, like what it means to be a constructive group member. That there we would all benefit if we were better group members at whatever level we're operating. If we think to ourselves, what can I do to make the situation better? What can I do to make this situation more functional, to be honest, right? And that means, in a lot of cases, it's, do I need to speak up, or maybe I need to shut up?
In some ways, I can see this circling around to what you were talking about before in teaching your elementary school kids, the idea of sacrifice and knowing that they may be better at something than somebody else, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they need to have the most powerful team around them, right?
Exactly. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for making that connection. I wouldn't have drawn it as clearly, but it's exactly that. It's really recognizing, for instance, if I'm a strong player, I can't take away someone else's struggle. They're not going to get better if I play for them. That they have to, they're going to need to practice on their own. And as I mature, this is not something that that everyone can do, but as I mature, I can ask myself, what can I do to help this person practice and get better?
Right. Without
taking away their agency in their own struggle and productive struggle, right?
Right.
Not, like I'm suffering, but productive struggle. We all need that. We need productive struggle.
Yeah. It's like that. I used to do a lot of powerlifting. It's like that term, time under tension, right? The muscle gets stronger when you increase time under tension, whether that's, whether you're whether you're flexing the muscle or restricting the load in gravity, right? So yeah, that's really cool. So what has surprised you lately?
What has surprised me? Oh, okay. It's funny that, because I also just wrote a short blog post about this. What has surprised me lately is discovering that I am as territorial and as set in my ways as most other veteran teachers. I wrote a blog post about having a new colleague, and who's wonderful and knowledgeable and eager, and that I found myself falling often enough into fairly defensive kind of positioning, and feeling a little bit affronted by and realizing it's just about me and my fear of losing whatever power, right? In whatever form that might take. And so I managed to sit down and actually write it out. And it's been so helpful. It's been very freeing, and also very cool to hear the resonance that several people have said, ooh, this is me right now. Oh yes, I feel that. So I know I'm not alone, that many of us go through this process of recognizing this is hard. It's hard to share. I mean, we think kids struggle with it. Ooh, adults, we struggle.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's what I was talking about earlier about that. The filters and the barriers that we put into place, right? Because it doesn't matter. I think if we're 5 or we're 55, we don't like to be judged.
Oof. No one likes to be judged. And yet here we are, judgment machines, let loose. I mean,
yeah, sometimes rampant. And
yes.
And I think as we get older, we get better at the self-judgment and the self-condemnation, right? And I have a daughter who's a very prolific writer. Like, she's written 5 novels already, but hasn't published one of them. And she's shared with me that the first 2 will never see the light of day. Right. And I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. But what about the other 3? And she's like, no, I'm not ready yet. And so I'm trying to coach her through the what's the end purpose of you writing? Do you want to write just because you love writing, or do you want to get published? And we're working through that now. And
that is, it's a fascinating dilemma. And it would be, that's a conversation I would love to have, because I think about that a lot. I think about, the purpose of writing, and for me, it has become a form of release, right? And whether or not people read it, it's not as important. But I've also reached a stage where I know probably somebody's going to read it, and maybe someone will respond. But it's not the motivation. And it also, what has been key for me is recognizing my privilege is that I am not dependent on it for income or influence. I don't need those things in order to feel successful. And so that kind of frees me up to enjoy the process of, I read this thing. Let me write about it. Let me tell you about what I read. And this was so cool. So it's really, I think a lot about how people think about writing, and what power we give the process of writing, and what power we give the process of publishing, and what we consider publishing. Because I can modestly say that I'm a publisher, that I have, people have given me their words to publish, and I have compensated them. And I realized, actually, I didn't go and get a degree in that. I just said, hey, friends, I'm starting this publication. Want to write? Yes. Okay, great. Here, I want to give you, here, go buy a pizza, because that's all I can afford. So those processes have really helped me sort of relax around the notion of what's writing, what's publishing, and what does it matter, and for whom?
Yeah, those are such powerful questions, right? And yeah, thank you, because I'm going to try and bring this back to conversation with my daughter later on, but because she writes well. I've again, I've only been privileged to see parts of the other 3 novels. I haven't been able to look at any. And in fact, everybody in her family, I don't think anybody in her family outside of her has actually seen a complete novel. Right? We've seen bits of it and pieces of it. We know they exist on her computer. We know that they're there. But it's like this elusive animal in the fog that you can see the outline, and you get close, and then it runs away. But
I also understand that she is not alone, that there are many, many, many writers who operate that way, and who, in their own time, recognize when the moment arrives. And I guess that's the key, is if you can recognize your own moment.
Right. That's powerful. Thank you. I'm going to share that with her. All right. Well, Sherri, thank you so much for the time that you spent with me today. This is amazing. I love it. And this is great. And I just have a few final questions to ask of you.
Okay.
And again, thank you for the time that you spent with me. What are, if you were to recommend your top 3 to 5 books for people to read? I know that for most of us, that's hard to do because there's so many good ones out there, but what are the top 3 to 5 books that you think people should pick up in the next year?
Okay. 3 to 5 books that you should pick up in the next year. Okay. I'm going to start with Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. America's Reckoning with Slavery. That was just it's a marvelous read. It's absolutely phenomenal. The second thing I'm going to recommend, I want to say anything written by Tressie McMillan Cottom. And it doesn't have to be her book thick, which I can recommend. However, she has such a huge range of articles, blog posts, also a podcast with Roxane Gay. Any of those opportunities to hear her talk, to just sort of hear her thinking, take it. The third book I am going to shout out, and it's hard. It's hard to do this because I'm sort of like, I'm looking furtively at my bookshelf, and I see these spines sort of waving at me, pick me. I want to say, okay, a recent one, Mia Birdsong, How We Show Up. And that is about community, building community, sustaining community. I love that one. And okay, one more that is a little bit off the beaten track, but I loved it because it was off the beaten track. And that is The Tragedy of Heterosexuality by Jane Ward. Good one.
Nice. Thank you. I've heard of that third one. I haven't heard of Thick. I feel like I should have, but
it's a collection of essays. Okay. So it was her second book after Lower Ed, mm-hmm. And it's stunning, just absolutely, and it's fabulous because essay writing is really a major strength.
Nice. Sherri, what are you listening to right now? What's in your earbuds or on your phone? What are you listening to?
Well, I just started listening to podcasts this summer. I finally decided that I had time. And so I did begin listening to Here to Slay with Tressie McMillan Cottom and Roxane Gay. And it is, as they describe it, the Black feminist podcast of your dreams. And it is exactly that. And a second podcast that I discovered this summer is Let's Talk Bruh. And it is this season they've been focusing on it's about Black masculinity, and they've been focusing on divesting from patriarchy this last year. So all the episodes have really focused on that, and it is a delight and a pleasure, and it's just it's wonderful.
Nice.
Just wonderful work.
Nice. I've seen it. I almost clicked on it to subscribe to it, but now I'm going to have to go back and do it.
Yes. Yes. Let's talk, bruh.
Okay. Good deal. Last question, Sherri. What impact, contribution do you want to have?
Once upon a time, in an essay written by Audrey Waters, who is another mentor, EdTech's Cassandra, she wrote about being a node among learners. I think like that. I think that was the term. And I've taken that ever since that. And I thought, yes, I want to be a node among learners. So someone who's connecting other people, learners with learners, writers with readers, and all of those things. That's what I aspire to be. And so I try to curate and share to positive effect, and hopefully make the world a better place in small ways. Good. Thank you so much. We didn't get a chance to talk about how you like to be a digital interloper, but maybe in a future episode we can talk about that. That's amazing. Thank you again, Sherri, so much for taking the time to be with us today. And everybody listening, I will link to these books and other things in the show notes. Yes, everybody, there will be show notes this season. Something, Sherri, that I've been neglecting over the last season or two is to put show notes together, but they will be there. I promise everybody. And Sherri, thanks again. And I wish you nothing but the best. Thank you so much for having me, Tim. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to this awesome episode with Sherri. Like I said in the podcast, everything that we've mentioned here, the books, the podcasts, and even the show notes, you can find back at the website praxispedagogy.com in the show notes for this episode. Thanks again. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.